Seizing on growing anxiety over the DPRK and the opposition's weakness, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan Monday called for an early election to be held next month. It seems that Abe has slithered away from accountability for various scandals and seeks to consolidate his power in the future. Will his gamble help him out of the dilemma or help provide a bright future for Japan's economy and a stable society? How will it impact on Northeast Asia and beyond? Is the rest of the world seeing a power leader emerging? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Xunli Li of University of International Business and Economics and Professor James Ray, California State University, Sacramento. We shall also speak to Takasato Watanabe, Professor Emeritus at Dorchester University via satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. But before we get started, let's look at this.
Abe's decision for a snap election have met more resistance than understanding from within the ruling party, opposition camp and the general public. Despite Abe's best effort to explain and seek public understanding, there are criticism within Abe's Liberal Democratic Party that he lacked the legitimate reason to dissolve the lower house chamber.
I will dissolve the lower house of parliament on the 28th.
Oppositions criticize that dissolving the lower house without proper debate violates Article 53 of the Constitution, which requires the cabinet to convene if a quarter or more of the members of either house make the demand. Oppositions have been demanding extraordinary sessions to pursue Abe's scandals since the end of the last Diet session. Public survey shows that over 60% of the respondents say election is premature, as the reshuffled cabinet have not done a single day's work since it was appointed on August the 3rd. Analysts say it might be the best opportunity for Abe to maintain the clear majority within the Diet.
Although this will be a tough election, we will have to secure a majority with our coalition members.
Public support rate have recovered, contributed by DPRK's repeated missile launch over Japan and nuclear tests. However, there are concerns that the support rate might drop once again if oppositions get a chance to question Abe on school scandal once again in the new Diet sessions. Also, the opposition camp is at its weakest. The main opposition Democratic Party is still reorganizing after electing a new leader, while the new party to be formed by popular Tokyo Governor Yuriko Koike, who defeated the ruling LDP during the Tokyo Assembly election, have not gathered enough strength to contend.
Dr. Xiong, what do you make of the complaints by opposition parties in Japan that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is using this early election to consolidate his power base and it is premature? Because according to the results of survey, up to 60% of the respondents say election is premature as the reshuffled cabinet has not done a single day's work since it was appointed on August the 3rd.
So, as we all know, in this July, LDP, Liberal Democratic Party, has suffered a great loss in the local election in Tokyo, and frankly speaking, LDP has been defeated by Ms. Yuriko Koike and her new political party. But by this time, Ms. Koike and her new party is still not powerful enough to challenge the predominance all over the country of the LDP and Mr. Abe. So Mr. Abe, maybe he is trying to grasp this moment to have an earlier election to get rid of the potential political threat from Ms. Koike and her new political party.
James, do you think this next election will go ahead as scheduled?
I think certainly in mid-October the election will happen, October 22nd. I think, as Mr. Xiong said, it's probably an opportune time for Prime Minister Abe to fortify his position and move forward with the conditions of the North Korea threat to move past the scandals that have afflicted him for this past year.
Let me go to Professor Watanabe. Hello. What do you make of the planning of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe? Will his plan work out?
He said in the press conference yesterday that there are two very big problems which should be solved by the opinion of the people. The first one is how to spend the consumption tax hike money. The second one is how to deal with the North Korean problem, missiles and nuclear weapons. But these are the things which have been continued for the past 1 decade or so. So this is not the right cause of the snap election. So this means that Mr. Abe needs snap election itself for himself, because for the past 1 month, his supporting rate was so low, but after the DPRK made some missile launching and nuclear weapons, because of the affiliation with the United States, Mr. Trump, his supporting rate was, got a bit higher and higher. So he decided to have the snap election to succeed in the third, succeeding position of Prime Minister as a leader of LDP for next year. This is the main purpose of himself.
And do you believe Prime Minister Abe has been able to use public fears arising from DPRK's ballistic missiles as his capital to show up his support in Japan domestically?
Yes. Yes, you are very correct. Mr. Abe is saying very many things about the dangerous points of the DPRK, especially leader Mr. Kim Jong-un. And he says, only LDP and self-defense forces, together with the United States, can help the activities of Japan and Japanese, and also economic growth of Japanese. Mr. Trump and myself, it means Mr. Abe, are very close friends. So we too can solve this problem. These are only two peoples which can solve this problem. This is wrong, but you see, when he says like this, most of the TV shows and most of the newspapers must report what he has said. But other medias, especially newspapers, are criticizing Mr. Abe. However, the TV are talking about only scandals. Scandals are scandals. Scandals is a scandal, so that is Mr. Abe know about that, and also his surrounding people using this dangerous things for their political issues. This is completely wrong for the peaceful order in East Asia.
Thank you very much, Professor Watanabe. I'll get back to you in a few minutes. But Dr. Dong, is it true that, as some of the Chinese observers here point out, we have unfortunately a very bad neighboring country, the DPRK, that used ballistic missiles and nuclear tests to, on the one hand, protect the government itself, but on the other hand, it has helped Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to ally many more Japanese voters behind him in an attempt to rewrite Article 9 of the pacifist constitution. Having said this, South Korea was able to seize this opportunity and deploy more THAAD programs, despite the protests from Beijing.
In fact, South Korea has get use of this opportunity provided by DPRK to deploy more THAAD system in the past few weeks. So to this degree, from this perspective, we can see that DPRK's missile launches and the nuclear test can really be helpful for some politicians in South Korea and Japan, such as Mr. Abe, to consolidate its political target, political goals, such as amendment of the peace constitution and the deployment of THAAD system.
To put it more bluntly, James, in fact, the Chinese national security has been seriously hurt as a result of the ballistic missile tests and nuclear tests. Well, let's come back to examine domestic politics of Japan. How do you rate the Abenomics and the performance of his cabinet ever since he put forward this idea of, for example, restructuring the Japanese economy, using inflation and printing more money?
I think after essentially 2 decades of stagnation with the bubble economy from the real estate collapse in the late 80s and early 90s, there's been a slight uptick in the last year. So I think we could see, worldwide growth has ticked up in this past year. I think Prime Minister Abe's policies have not harmed growth, and growth, you could say, take a little bit of credit. But I think the decision to invest in childcare and education, and rather than paying down the debt, is going to be a long-term problem, because Japan's debt is twice what the United States debt is. It's 200% of GDP. And I think the aging population, Japan has so many social, economic challenges that need to be brought forward rather than military-focused spending.
Professor Watanabe, are you sure that Prime Minister Abe will be able to secure a clear majority in the lower house? And do you think he's going to use the 2 major excuses? One is the aging population of Japan, and the other a threat from the DPRK to persuade more of the electorate and let them accept his proposals in reforming the Japanese economy? What do you think?
He said in the press conference that there are 2 points for the snap election, hike of the consumption tax and the North Korean problem. However, as you have pointed out, he added how to use the money which is received by the consumption tax hike. One is education for the higher stage, university and high school for the poor people, and also the young mothers and the poor family children in the kindergarten, primary school, and junior high school, especially kindergarten. No, a fee for them. So this is very attractive policy for the people who are not rich. However, this is not the problem which must cause the snap election this time. This is very important. Also, 2 years ago, the consumption tax was raised. He promised that he will spend the money for paying the money for the debt, and also for the children and also aged people. But he has not done so far. And on this time only, he decided to take these items as the cause of the snap elections. So this is not the right cause and correct cause, any politically and also socially. For me, if the China, South Korea, and Japan are going hand in hand, North Korea cannot do so many things. But the point is that among these 3 countries, South Korea and Japan and China, we have this historical understanding problem, which is caused by the misunderstanding of Japanese government, especially led by Prime Minister Abe. This is the most important thing.
Well, you have your understanding about the troubles between our 3 major countries in Northeast Asia. And the Chinese may somehow agree with you, but we have our own deeper understanding about the rivalries between these 2 major economies, Japan and China. Having said this, what do you think of the tensions in Northeast Asia? Do you believe Mr. Abe will be able to rewrite the constitution as one of the longest serving prime ministers in the post-war era? And to what degree do you think he's able to drum up support from the general public and get the job done?
And according to the political situation nowadays in Japan, I can say at least a little hopeful for Mr. Abe to achieve his political goal of amendment of the constitution. And maybe he is hopeful to be the longest prime minister, to have the longest prime minister term. Yeah.
What do you think of the mandate that Abe is likely to acquire through using the anxiety of the electorate and the missile tests from the DPRK? Do you think he's going to get the job done easily?
I think we can see the transparency of this political move, but I think in the Japanese public there is great concern over DPRK. I think there is a long-term insecurity about the rise of China and the stagnation of Japan. And so I think he will remain popular, and I think he'll be able to ward off the political right that was just recently broken off, and then the political left, which seems very disorganized.
Right. Regarding the opposition disarray, let me go back to Professor Watanabe. What do you make of the strength, if any, of Democratic Party of Japan? It is the biggest opposition party, but it's still very weak. Will the Democratic Party of Japan be able to unite all other small parties and form a coalition or a united front against the LDP?
Now you see, Democratic Party of Japan has two problems. One is that 50% of them are for the economic system which Mr. Abe is giving on the desk. Half, they think that they should have the coalition with Communist Party and some other smaller parties. So in the name of the Democratic Party, there are two factions actually. And so, as was pointed out by a colleague in the studio, Ms. Koike, the governor of Tokyo government, she organized a new party, the Party of Hope. And her main intention is how to solve the question with the North Korean kidnapping. And second one is that how to postpone the hike of the consumption tax. So in the election to come, her party might get more members than Democratic Party. However, her idea is very conservative, very, very conservative. But she knows how to get votes of the people. So Mr. Abe and Ms. Koike, those two groups or parties have very many things in common. They are giving the ideas from the sentimental point of view.
Professor Watanabe,
Democratic Party,
we
yes.
have seldom heard anything about the Japanese Communist Party. Can you brief us on their political sloganeering, their charter? I mean, before the opening of the 19th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, do you expect our Japanese counterpart, if they could be called the Japanese counterpart, would send a message of congratulations to their colleagues in the neighboring country of China? I mean, do they see eye to eye on major issues of ideology, values, and the way economy is run and the society is rebuilt?
In the name of the Communist Party itself, Japanese Communist Party is a little different from yours, I think. They have the idea, but they don't have any experiences of giving the government to the people. So this is the first thing. The second thing, that their idea is a little, you see, conservative in the meaning of the Marxism idea. So your Communist Party and Japanese Communist Party is a little different. So I don't expect so many things to the Communist Party of Japan. But Komeito Party and Communist Party have in common in the strong organization of political ideas. So Komeito, how it goes to the Mr. Abe's direction or Ms. Koike's direction or others, this is the point of in the next election.
Thank you so much. Mr. Dong, one of Abe's legacies is the Abe Doctrine, a game changer because it lifts long-standing constitutional constraints on the military. The enhancement of the Prime Minister's executive powers in security matters is unprecedented. In doing so, Abe has politicized the personnel appointments to ensure that the yes men rise and discordant voices are marginalized, if not totally silenced.
In fact, a majority of the Japanese public are still not so satisfied with predominance of Prime Minister Abe. But the major problem for Japanese politics maybe nowadays is there is no other powerful opposition party to challenge the predominance of LDP and Mr. Abe. Just as Professor Watanabe has told us, maybe Ms. Koike may be a new political star who is rising to maybe in the future she can challenge the predominance of LDP. However, nowadays she is still not powerful enough to do so. So that's maybe the major problem for nowadays Japanese politics.
Dissatisfaction with the predominance of the LDP in domestic politics is one thing, James. To agree or not agree with the rewriting of the post-war pacifist constitution is quite another. Do you see any distinctions between these two positions of the opposition parties?
Well, I think to break the 1947 Constitution's commitment to pacifism would be quite revolutionary and radical, and I think that would be a dangerous gambit for Prime Minister Abe, though the far right would of course support that, but I think that would organize the left. I think 30 to 35% of the Japanese electorate would be totally against that, if not more, and would rally and probably organize themselves, and then he would probably lose a lot of the center because of the risk involved.
A broad question for both of you, and I believe it's also a question suitable for the analysis of Professor Watanabe, is do you believe the rapid rise and economic expansion of the PRC in our country has reinforced the anxiety and the fears of our neighboring country, Japan, so that the far right or the right-wing political forces in Japan have been reinforced, and they have developed a collective fear about the impact of having yet another economic superpower right at the doorstep of Japan?
In fact, this issue may be quite complicated in Japan. The rise of PRC, of People's Republic of China, may be a dual effect, may have dual effect on Japan.
You mean it's both a crisis and opportunity? They can see some of the opportunity and develop economic ties, but they are not sure about the national security. Is that your point?
Yeah. I can be only sure that DPRK may be a real threat, perceived in Japan.
But do you think Diaoyu Island still comes across as a major obstacle for serious improvement of the bilateral tie, which has been seriously marred by the alleged purchase of the Diaoyu Islands 6 years ago?
I think if the United States is going to include the Diaoyu Islands in the Mutual Defense Treaty with Japan, that's going to be seen as provocative, and I think Prime Minister Abe and Donald Trump have seemed to develop this strong commitment that wasn't clear before the election when candidate Trump was skeptical of the partnership. So I do think we're facing a longer-term challenge with resolving the island dispute.
Now, let's look at the DPP, Professor Watanabe. Without the leadership of the United States, do you believe and are you optimistic that the Japanese government will be able to assume leadership of DPP and put those countries together without the participation of China, which calls for RCEP instead of TPP to rejuvenate or revitalize the regional economy and help ASEAN at the same time?
This is the problem of the reorganization of international affairs in the East Asia. I think, as I have said before, China, South Korea, and Japan, these three countries are very big economic entities. If these three countries are connected closely and have the good relations, we can do so many things even without the United States. Of course, the United States is a strong nation, and so we have to be friends with that country. But first is East Asia, peaceful order in this area. North Korea is very important, so we have to negotiate. But if the unity of the China, Japan, and South Korea not existing, DPRK can do anything independently, attacking orally, not physically. So the most important thing is to solve the understanding of the past, and Japan must say, we are very, very sorry. We have done wrong things in the past age, before the war and after the war, even getting the misunderstanding among the people. So this is very important, I think. From this point, the peaceful order of Asia can be continued and should continue.
James, what do you think of the presidency of Donald Trump in terms of consolidating the U.S.-Japan Security Pact, which is described by the media and by the White House as the cornerstone in laying groundwork for protecting peace and security in East Asia?
Well, I do think in Japan there is strong voices on the left and right that are skeptical of American bases and have, when Prime Minister Hatoyama was elected from the Democratic Party, wanted to move Futenma out of Okinawa. I think when Donald Trump raised the skepticism as a candidate, that set off alarm bells in the national security establishment in the United States. But since then, Abe was very quick to connect with Donald Trump. They seem to have developed a personal rapport. And so I think the commitment of the U.S. to Japan is ironclad, but I think that puts Japan in a precarious position because ultimately it's going to have to recognize the Asian Investment Bank is going to be the leading development bank in the region, that China is going to be the ultimate center of power in East Asia, and how to blend relations with the U.S. and China to be harmonious.
Right after taking office, President Xi Jinping hosted a major conference on neighboring or neighborly diplomacy. At the conference, he emphasized the importance of guaranteeing external conditions to protect domestic economic reconstruction. That's the avowed goal of this generation of the Chinese leadership. Having said this, what do you think will happen after the 19th National Congress of the CPC Central Committee? Will Mr. Xi Jinping reconsider seriously mending the fence and repairing the relationship with Tokyo?
In fact, China will go on with the efforts to have a much healthier relations with Japan and other neighboring countries. Although the disputes may not be so easy for us to have a solution, but on the whole, China may try to keep stable and peaceful environment surrounding China.
Do you think, because for most of the Chinese, the foreign policy of Abe's administration seems quite divided. On the one hand, they did try proactively to repair the ties with Beijing. On the other hand, they followed the United States very closely. They took cues from Washington time and again in conducting their own diplomacy.
Well, I think it was a mistake under the Obama administration for both the United States and then Japan to reject the AIIB, and then it leaves Japan in this isolated position. Once Donald Trump destroyed the TPP, that was their only kind of lifeline. So now Japan really would, I think, need to, in a sort of supplicant position, go back to China and hope to join with that, because the Japanese-led Asian Development Bank is not going to be the dynamic force. So I think the reality is to improve relations with China is really in Japan's interest, with or without the United States backing.
But it does take time for the Japanese politicians and those with a vision to seriously improve ties with the PRC. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.